Welcome back to Zag Talk. I am Dylan, again joined by my hosts B. Mary and Carson. We are talking end of season Zags this week. So Zags cap off an undefeated regular season. We're going to take a little bit of a look into where our current metrics stand as far as KenPom, some individual stats. B. Mary is going to give us some highlights from Evan Miyakawa's site, which we've talked about quite a few times. We're going to talk about WCC conference tournament, but also going into NCAA tournament, what our odds look like there. And then at the end, I'm going to do a little bit of a highlight on a new segment, Dylan's Betting Corner, that will be trademarked by the time this episode comes out. First, I'll hand it off to Carson. You want to give us a little highlight of KenPom numbers and individual stats?
Yeah, so just wrapping up the regular season. In terms of where we are, I know there's still some major conference teams that are finishing out play this weekend, but as of right now, Zags are at 36.85 in adjusted efficiency margin, which would be good for fourth all-time pre-NCAA tournament. So obviously a few games there to jump back up into the 38s where we were for a little bit. But we trail the 2001 Duke team, the 1999 Duke team, and the 2019 Virginia team, with the Virginia team being the closest. They were at 37.4. So still some potential history to be made there. I think the biggest trend and what we've seen those numbers drop a little bit over the last couple games was on the defensive side of things where, we had been improving. Still a top 10 team. We're currently 10th at 88.8 on adjusted defense. So not a whole lot going on. It was going to be tough to see us stay playing at such a high level against some of those teams coming through the end of the season, just trying to get it over with and get into the postseason. But currently still the number one offense in KenPom. In terms of individual players, I don't think we're going to get the two players averaging 20 points a game that we kind of mentioned earlier in the season. That's kind of trailed off. We got Kispert at 19.5 points per game and Timmy at 18.9. We have two other guys, Jalen Suggs and Ayayi, averaging double digits, with Nemhard at 9 points right there, close to 10. And then Watson's actually, I think I've been pretty impressed with him this season. I know that he's been kind of I don't know what you want to call it, but just a lot of conversation. He's a polarizing player in terms of some people love him, some people hate him. Seems like people who know basketball and know his value and what to expect from him are appreciative of what he brings to this team. He's been super efficient inside. I saw a chart somewhere on Twitter this week that just showed I think he's the third most efficient player in the paint so far this year. And I believe it was Timmy who was right behind him. The players in front were Huff from Virginia, and I'm blanking on the other one. Maybe it was Coburn. Other than that, Jalen Suggs, 13.9 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists. So really filling up the stat sheet there. Ayayi, same thing, 11.3, 6.8 rebounds per game, and 3.2 assists. One thing to point out, and I know people have talked about it on Twitter a lot this year, is Nemhard's assist-to-turnover ratio is pretty nuts. He's averaging 4.4 assists per game and 1.3 turnovers per game, which I know we've talked about just how important he's been to this team and the difference he makes from we were number one going into the season without him, and now we're clear number one with him in the lineup and now in the starting lineup. And that ball handling and just being able to take care of the ball, I think is something we've seen on past really good Gonzaga teams that we've struggled with presses. Saw Florida State that one year. I know we weren't a number one seed there, but the press has kind of bothered us in the past, and I don't really see a whole lot of teams trying that with us with our ability to take care of the ball this year. So that's been fun to see, just his contribution to this team.
From a KenPom ranking perspective, when we've talked previously about where we line up with teams from the past, has that been end of season as in post NCAA tournament, or has that been end of regular season rankings for KenPom?
Yeah, so I posted on the Zag Talk Twitter account probably a month or so ago now, and I did a pre-tournament rankings and a post-tournament rankings. I think the post-tournament ones tend to be a little bit lower overall, but you do get some of those teams that go on runs that end up boosting it. But a lot of times those are like the UConns, the 2014 or 2011 UConn teams that, weren't great before and then just got hot and kind of skyrocket up. I think the Virginia team pre NCAA tournament was 37.4, and they ended up, I think, lower 37s or upper 36s. So yeah, this is using pre NCAA tournament. So I think that's post conference tournaments. And then I have a chart. I'm going to be posting this later in this week or after this weekend when the final games of the regular season are played, and just kind of track where the top 5 teams in KenPom this year have kind of trended throughout the season, and then throw one in there too with the 1999 and 2001 Duke teams to kind of see when we were kind of close and above them, one of them for a little bit, and now kind of how just the trends of those have played out. So stay tuned for that.
One cool stat that I saw, and I can't remember if this was in relation to the rest of the WCC or what, but one thing that stood out to me was Watson's points off of assists. So like points where he's scoring and someone else is making the play for him and gets the assist. I think that helps with his efficiency. At the same time, he's looked a lot more aggressive the last few games and just more assertive and more confident, and kind of what we've all been hoping for this whole year. So I'd be curious to see, moving into the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament, if that aggressiveness continues, and also like moving into next year and thinking ahead a little bit. I'm really curious to see if that trend of buckets off of assists continues for him, or if he's able to kind of create his own shots too. So I don't know, just something to keep an eye out for that I noticed.
He seemed to be more confident coming off the bench as we've been playing around with starting lineups over the last 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 games. I think part of that makes sense. I think you get demoted to the bench. There's one of two ways you can take that. You can take it as a motivator, or you can take it as the opposite of that. And I think he's really taken it as a motivator. I also think he gets the opportunity to come off the bench with fresh legs against either A, guys that have been running for a little bit, or B, their bench players. And as we know, we're not playing teams that has nearly as much depth as we do. So I'm hoping that trend can continue as we start to play better and better teams getting into NCAA tournament. I'm hoping he continues to be that spark off the bench to be able to keep hopefully the hot starts we have going against teams come tournament time.
I mean, we've seen that so far this year with when we've gotten in foul trouble, where Timmy's gotten in foul trouble, and we really do need him off the bench. I know he's not a true big, but like that's really all we have right now. Ballo is not worth a shit on defense. So you can throw him in there. You can throw the body in. You can throw Ben Gregg in. He actually got some good minutes the other day. There wasn't a huge drop off there. So, I mean, there's those guys, but you really need them in there. I think one other thing from a stat perspective, it just reminded me talking about Watson. I don't know why, but Stephen Carr had tweeted out earlier this week that in transition this season, which obviously we're super efficient, one of the best in the country, which is why we're able to push out leads so quickly. But Corey Kispert last season in transition was 20 for 40 at the rim and 28 of 67 from deep. This season, he is 38 for 43 at the rim. He's missed 5 shots in transition at the rim all season, and he's 30 for 62 from 3. So nearly 50% from 3 in transition. And I don't know the quick math there, but really, really damn good at the rim in transition. He doesn't miss. And I mean, that kind of seems to be the trend with this year's team is if you give them a transition opportunity, it's not very often that they're going to miss it and make you pay. And just kind of going along with some of that efficiency with Corey Kispert. We were in a conversation with, I think, a Virginia fan who was saying, oh, all you have to do is run off the guy in the headband off the 3-point line, and then you can beat him. Let's forget that the other guy in the headband also had 30 points or 29 points against them. And, oh, by the way, Corey Kispert's true shooting percentage on the season, which accounts for free throws and such, is 70.2%. And his effective field goal percentage is 67.1%. So he's not missing a whole lot of shots this year, which is, I mean, he's just having a crazy season, which is great for him. His draft stock, I know we've talked about, has skyrocketed through this whole year.
Well, I think also going back to that USF game, Carson, I think you did a really good job of highlighting when we were doing that podcast of, they did come out. I mean, Todd Golden's a great coach. He coached his team well, told them what to do, which was get Corey Kispert off the 3-point line. And unfortunately for them, Corey Kispert's developed quite a lot of other abilities since the last time we played them, and really honed in his ability to attack the basket, mid-range jumpers, get to the free throw line. And I think that's shown through. And I think in addition to those fast break points and fast break shooting percentages this year for Kispert, he's also shooting 89% from the free throw line too. So even if he's not making the basket on a transition basket, if he's getting fouled, that's also going to be money. So there's really not a lot you can do to stop Corey Kispert come tournament time, which is going to be really exciting. And the other point that I made in response to that Virginia fan was also like, yeah, even if you shut down Kispert completely, he scores 3-4 points that game. You've got 3 other guys that are up for position awards this year that are top 5 for their position, and on top of that, you've got an incredible amount of depth on this team with Nembhard and Watson as well, who probably didn't get the amount of recognition that they should have gotten from awards this year. So just a phenomenally well-rounded team.
Yep. I think it shows through in the analytics as well. Evan Miyakawa, we've talked about him. Check out his website at evanmiya.com or follow him on Twitter at evanmiya. He's got some awesome individual and team metrics that really help put things into perspective. His statistics don't go quite as far back as KenPom. It only goes back to, I believe, 2016, but there's definitely some value here in his metrics. And in terms of what the Zags are doing this year, it's kind of unparalleled. I'm going to go through just some quick individual metrics and some team metrics from Evan Miyakawa's site here. So the top 4 players in the Bayesian performance rating, which is what Evan uses to rate all the players in college basketball, all the teams in college basketball. The top 4 in this order are Corey Kispert, Drew Timme, Jalen Suggs, and Joel Ayayi. Kofi Coburn comes in at number 5. Andrew Nembhard comes in at number 6. So our 5 starters are in the top 6 most efficient players in the nation. Watson comes in at 29. So at this point, we are the only team with 6 players in the top 30. Baylor and Michigan each have 4. But that's about it. No one else kind of, even comes close. If you remove the preseason expectations, which you can do on Evan's player rating section, the Zags own the top 5 spots, 1 through 5. Kispert, Timme, Suggs, Ayayi, Nembhard, which again, unparalleled. There's really never been anything like this. I think the closest, and this is something that Evan talked about when we had him on as a guest a few months back. The closest team would be the Nova 2018 team, and that's the example Evan kind of gave to compare this Gonzaga team to. If we take a look at what they did, they had 3 players in the top 15, and they, up until this season, were the number 1 ranked team by BPR all time on Evan's site, so that kind of puts it into perspective a little bit. In terms of individual performance, since the 2016-2017 season, there have been 24 players that have had a greater than 99 Bayesian performance rating. 7 of those 24 are Zags. We've got the 4 from this year that are in the top 4 spots: Brandon Clark, Rui, and Nigel Williams-Goss. The next closest team is Kansas, with 3 folks that fit into that category. And 2 of them are 2 different seasons from Udoka Azubuike. So again, that just goes to show you the last 4 or 5 years, Gonzaga's teams have not only been extremely efficient, but our best players are the ones who are, they're the most efficient players in the country. It's been a pretty incredible run. Now, in terms of the team metrics, At this point, Gonzaga has the number one highest team Bayesian performance rating of all time, 3 full points better than that 2018 Nova team. We're the only team to eclipse the 100 BPR rating. At this point, we are this season number one overall by 13 points. Michigan comes in at number 2 at 89. We're at 102. We have the number 1 rated offense, the number 2 rated defense, just behind Michigan. And we have 7 players in the top 9 in a metric that's called team efficiency margin, which basically measures the improvement of a team's efficiency when a certain player is in the game. So if we're counting the 6 players that have already been mentioned, those guys are in the top 9, and Aaron Cook enters the fold as well. If we're taking a look at team efficiency margin. So again, it speaks to our depth, and we've never really seen anything like this in Evan Miyakawa's ratings. It's just been absolutely incredible. So, it's just worth acknowledging. We've really got to cherish every moment we have this team on the floor, and we get to see them play.
You talk about the depth on this team, and I think that's kind of been reflected in some of the awards that were the award finalists and semifinalist lists that we've seen coming out here. We obviously kind of talked about it last week with the assumption that the last 2 awards that were going to be named for the Hoop Hall finalist awards were going to be Corey Kispert and Drew Timme for their respective position awards. But now that's confirmed. We have 4 players in the 5 positional awards being nominated in the finalist of 5. And I mean, that's just nuts. I think, Brian, you had said something about how we don't that's never happened before, where even 2 or 3, that might've been the All-American team, but I don't know the last time that there's been 4 players from the same team for 4 different awards. You might have 2 in the guard category, point guard or shooting guard, but I mean, it's pretty crazy to see that. Also this week, we've seen the Naismith Player of the Year and Coach of the Year semifinalist award list be named. We only got Drew Timme and Corey Kispert on the Naismith Player of the Award list. Jalen Suggs got cut from that one. And then obviously Mark Few was on the Coach of the Year semifinalist list. And then yesterday or today, the Wooden Award finalists, the other Player of the Year award list got released. And that one we did have 3. Jalen Suggs was included on that one. So good to see him still getting the recognition. I think when it comes down to it, and this kind of transitions into the All-American teams that will eventually get released here at the end of the season, I kind of think, at one point we were talking about there might be 3 guys from Gonzaga on the first team All-American team. I think it's looking more and more like 2. I've even seen some projecting only 1, which seems a little weird to me. I think the one I saw the other day was you had Jared Butler, Ayo Dosunmu, Cade Cunningham, Corey Kispert, and blanking on Luka Garza. So I get it. Cade Cunningham was a guy who I was like, yeah, I could see him sneaking into first team All-American. And then I think, well, who gets cut there? Like, are you really taking out Ayo? Are you really taking out Jared Butler? And then the other 2 are obviously Kispert and Timme. It seems hard for me to take out Timme. I know Kispert won the WCC Player of the Year award because Mark Few only gets to nominate 1 player, and he's going to nominate the senior in that situation, which is why Corey got it over someone like Drew Timme. But I mean, it seems really hard for me to differentiate between those 2 seasons. I mean, they've both been crazy all year, and you take one away, I don't really know how you're differentiating there, but either way, I think we're going to get 1 or 2 on the first team All-American list. And then depending on how that shakes out, we'll have Jalen Suggs and one of those 2 other guys if they don't make first team All-American, which now that I'm remembering correctly, I think, Brian, you said that would be the first time ever that one team had 3 All-Americans on any team. Is that right?
Yep, exactly. And not only that, I think it's just crazy that that we've got 2, we're the only team that has 2 guys in that top 10 list or the semifinals list. And one of them is not the player who is projected to be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft this year. So pretty wild.
Do you think there's any level of recency bias when we get into awards voting in that Corey Kispert, and I'm not saying Corey Kispert has been playing bad in any sense of the word, but he hasn't been as hot as he might have been at the beginning of the season. And Drew Timme is definitely playing better than he was at the beginning of the season and is really hot. Do you think there's any level of recency bias that plays into end of year voting for awards?
Yes, for sure. I think there's a lot of recency bias in college basketball in general, and especially in college basketball media. We've seen this recently. Anytime a team beats another team, like we saw it with Michigan. Well, first we saw it with Baylor because they were playing ranked teams, and everyone's like, "Oh, Baylor, clear number one. Gonzaga's really good, but I think Baylor has the edge." Baylor went on pause. Everyone forgot about them, and suddenly, oh, Michigan. I think they're the clear number one team. And I think a little bit before that was even Ohio State. You'd hear people being like, well, Gonzaga and Baylor are there, but Ohio State is playing the best basketball of anyone in college basketball. And then they lose 3 straight. People forget about them. Then it's Michigan. And then Michigan loses to Illinois without their best player. Terrible loss, which fuck you, Michigan, first of all. Excuse my language. But that was great. But yeah, and then somebody's like, oh, Illinois, I think it's Illinois versus Gonzaga versus the field. And it's like, come on, there doesn't have to be a second team. And just one win doesn't determine a team's greatness. I think the reason why Baylor and Gonzaga were originally thought of as being so far head and shoulders above everybody else was because they didn't have those games where they really slipped up. And if they did, they still won by 15, 20 points. Obviously, Baylor coming off pause is an odd variable to throw into that. But like Gonzaga isn't going on the road and losing by 20 at Minnesota, no matter how good Minnesota plays at home. And they sure as hell aren't losing to Illinois by 20 plus with their worst or with their best player on the bench. So I think that's the difference when we talk about like the tiers. And I think there's a want in the media for there to be a conversation about that. Just like I think with Luka Garza for a lot of the season, people are like, oh, how about Corey Kispert? How about Ayo Dosunmu? Like, is he really the number one guy? Is he really player of the year? And the answer, it seems, is yes, if we were looking at voting odds, as much as we would like it to be somebody else. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of recency bias and availability bias, especially this year with teams going on pause and not being able to see a guy play for 2 or 3 weeks. I think that really skews it. But body of work, yeah. I mean, I think if Kispert got hot at the beginning of WCC play and was averaging 25, 26 points a game in conference, there might be more of a conversation in some of those Player of the Year awards, but he's not. He didn't. And so we're here, and I think we're okay with that.
Do you guys think that Ayo Dosunmu not playing in some of these games in the last, kind of down the stretch of the regular season, potentially into the Big Ten conference tournament, do you think that him not playing is going to impact his, I guess, favor or the way that the committee looks at his body of work?
I think he's an All-American, first team All-American regardless at this point. I think that maybe in the Player of the Year conversation, it might have killed his momentum, maybe for Jared Butler too. But it kind of seemed like Garza had taken back control of that right before Ayo got hurt. So it's not. I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be weird for them to dock him for missing 3 games at this point. So I mean, he's a stud. I don't think they're going to dock him that much.
Yeah. The reason I ask is just because he had two triple doubles in the month of February, and talk about recency bias. He was playing his best basketball prior to breaking his nose, I think, and so he could have continued to make a pretty crazy push, and who knows if he has a triple double against Michigan, maybe it just changes the whole dynamic of the conversation, and you can look at what Garza's done, but I mean, 3 triple doubles in a season, and one of them coming against the top 2 team in the country, like, that would have been wild. So I don't know, just figured I'd ask because I think that he has been playing incredible basketball. He's got a good team around him, but he's definitely just been playing incredible.
All I want is mask Ayo for the tournament.
Get the carbon fiber mask that like LeBron wore when he was with the Heat too, as long as the NCAA hasn't banned those. Yeah, I think he's just a stud. There's going to be a snub on the first team All-American team regardless. It's either going to be Drew Timme or Corey Kispert or Cade Cunningham. They're all deserving. You could even say Jalen Suggs is a snub there, although I think when you look at the numbers, it's probably not as much of a snub for Jalen. But yeah, in terms of other awards, as we wrap this up, WCC Awards was almost a clean sweep for Gonzaga. The only one we didn't win was Defensive Player of the Year, which was Harms from BYU. And then Coach Few, obviously, Coach of the Year, Nemhard, Sixth Man of the Year. And Coach Few also picked up from College Hoops Today a Coach of the Year award this year already, even though the season's not over. So I don't know how you do that. But yeah, as we wrap that up, we head into the conference tournament this next week. Although the WCC tournament has already started, we know now that we'll either be playing St. Mary's or LMU, who will be playing. LMU will be playing without Kelly Leapepe, whatever his name.
Pepe. I learned that one before this episode because I said I'm not going to butcher it.
There you go. Yeah. So I mean, we're there. I think we're going to Vegas this weekend. I can't imagine if there's any sniff of a COVID exposure, like for instance there was in the Drake game the other day or yesterday. I think we're out of there immediately. Even if it's on the other side of the bracket, I think we're gone. But yeah, so we'll be playing St. Mary's or LMU, and then hopefully BYU, so we can pick up another Q1 game and a nice tune-up. They're number 19 in the net right now, and I think top 20 or top 30 in KenPom. So it's a good test. I don't think they match up super well with us, but regardless, it's good to play a team like that. In terms of the NCAA tournament, I think what's kind of been the big conversation over the last month or so with different teams has been the seeding talk. We got the pre-bracket reveal, about a month ago, where we were the number 1 overall seed. Baylor was right behind us at number 2, razor thin margin, and then it was a gap, and then Michigan, Ohio State. Now we know it's looking like Gonzaga, clear number 1 overall seed, which would be the first in our history, and then the big competition right now is between the 2 and 3 with Michigan and Baylor. They seem to kind of flip-flop quite a bit. And then the last number 1 seed, it seems like Illinois has that locked up as of right now. They play Ohio State this weekend. So that's kind of the last push that could happen. But it seems like it's going to be Illinois there. So what that kind of turns into, I know I posted something on Twitter about net 1 games not being created equal, as we were getting a lot of Michigan fans saying that they were better than Baylor. They had a better record than Baylor. I'm not sure, I didn't look before this what the strength of record is, but I know there's some sort of combination of 2 and 3. I think Michigan might be 2 now. But when you look at it, Michigan's Q1 games that they've played this year, if you average out their Q1 rankings of the opponents they're playing, as of right now, is around 30-something. That includes the Michigan State game tomorrow. So they're in the low 30s. Baylor is around 18, and Gonzaga is in the low 20s. So Baylor's played, on average, the better opponents. Obviously, they've lost a game. Michigan now has a Q2 loss with Minnesota, which I think most likely all but guarantees them the number 3 overall seed, as long as Baylor doesn't drop another game here. But I mean, these Michigan fans that are telling us that they've played way better teams and they have way better wins, it's like, first of all, you get more opportunities. Second of all, the teams you're playing aren't actually that great. You don't play a lot of teams in the teens or in the top 10. You play a lot of teams that are in the 30s to 70s, and they just happen to be Q1 games because you get to play them on the road. So, I mean, there's that. And then the other thing, I know, Brian, you've sent us a few texts back and forth, a little, I think, frustrated with some of the bracketologists who it seems like we keep getting a West Virginia or an Iowa or some combination or one of those teams in our bracket. And what it really comes down to is there's rules with seeding that the top 4 teams from any given conference can't be in the same bracket if they are on the top 4 seed lines. So for us, what that means is that we played 3 teams that, as of right now, are on the top 4 seed lines. Those are Iowa, who's projected as a number 2 seed, and then West Virginia and Kansas, who are currently projected as number 3 seeds. So in any given year, you always have a 25% chance of getting any single team that you've already played in your bracket, because there's 4 brackets. But this year, because there's 2 Big Ten teams on the number 1 line, that turns into a 50% chance of Iowa being in our bracket as the 2 seed, because they can't be in Illinois or Michigan's bracket. So it's either us or Baylor that gets them. And then for West Virginia or Kansas, there's a 67% chance that we get at least one of them in our bracket, because they can't be in Baylor's bracket. And if we don't get either, we're likely getting Oklahoma State in our bracket as a 4 seed, if they are a 4 seed, because they wouldn't be able to be in Baylor's bracket, or Michigan's, or Illinois if those other teams are in there. So the bracket's kind of taken shape a little bit. Hopefully that all made sense, but there's a very good chance that we're getting at least West Virginia or Kansas as our 3 seed. And there's a 50-50 chance that we're getting Iowa in our bracket, just the way it shakes out with the top-heavy Big Ten this year. But I mean, I think what you said, Brian, was, you're a little less worried about West Virginia without Tshiebwe. I know they've been better without him, but I think we do match up better against them. And then Iowa, not really concerned about, and Kansas, not really concerned about, just the way we match up, I think. I'm not sure your guys' thoughts on those teams.
Yeah. I think, but before we talk about the matchups individually, I just think it's so crazy. And I'm looking at Bracketville right now. We can put the link in the show notes, or I can tweet it out. But I guess last year or 2 years ago, Bracketville by far had the most well predicted bracket out of all the brackets that are the bracketologists that are out there. And right now, what he's got is on our side. We're the 1 seed, obviously. Iowa's 2, West Virginia's 3. He's got Texas Tech 4, but Virginia 5. So we've got 3 of the 4 teams that are in that top 16 overall seed range in our side of the bracket. And you could envision a scenario where, let's say West Virginia gets bounced early in the Big 12 tournament. Let's say Iowa bounces out early in the Big 10 tournament. All of a sudden, if West Virginia drops to the 4 line, Iowa drops to the 3, and Kansas wins the Big 12 tournament, they're in all likelihood going to be a 2 seed. And we end up in a situation where Kansas, Iowa, West Virginia, and Virginia are all on our side of the bracket because of the way that those rules work, which is just crazy to me. So I think this was a little bit, the way that this works and the way that this shakes out is a little bit of an oversight, because I think it kind of gives, it gives Illinois and Michigan potentially, depending on what teams they draw, and how Houston and Alabama, for example, who are the projected non-Big Ten 2 seeds, are playing, they could potentially get an easier draw on the way to the Sweet 16, even though they are seated lower than GU or Baylor. So to me, it's kind of a weird oversight. I get why the rule's in place, but it could be a little bit outdated, considering how top heavy the Big Ten is, and just how top heavy the nation is in terms of the top conferences and the teams in those conferences. So
yeah, even for the Elite Eight matchup outside of the Sweet 16 earlier in the tournament, is what could be the result of this is that Michigan or Illinois, whoever the 3 and 4 are, could potentially get the worst number 2 seed as well. Right now it's looking like, I think it's projected to be Houston. So, and at a time, I think people thought, 4 and 5 seeds were practically, or the number 4 and 5 overall teams were practically a 1. So whoever got that number 5 team, which at the time was Ohio State or Illinois, would be kind of screwed. I'm not that as worried about it now. I know Ohio State can play good basketball, but I'm not as concerned about that. Alabama, I think right now is the number 5 overall team. I would love to see them play Michigan, which is a potential. I just feel like Michigan's probably going to get the number 8 overall, the way it shakes out. But I mean, that's the thing with all the bracketologist stuff right now. And bracketology is that this last week and a half of the schedule, I guess week at this point, is going to be a complete shit show. There's going to be so much movement. there's teams are losing left and right that shouldn't be losing. We've seen it in the small conference tournaments where these teams who have been dominant throughout the year are losing games. And I mean, Brian, your sleeper pick for the tournament, Wright State, lost a crazy game. But I mean, I think that's the thing with the pandemic this year is, and why Gonzaga and Baylor, for the most part, have stood out so much is their consistency, whereas a lot of other really good teams this year have not had that consistency. And I think that's going to lead to a really mucked up conference tournament and NCAA tournament. We're going to see a lot of upsets. There's going to be a lot of really badly seeded teams in terms of some of the mid-majors who haven't gotten to play as many games. And I mean, we just almost saw Kansas lose to UTEP yesterday, 2 days ago. Like, Kansas just beat Baylor and is playing great basketball. And it's just, I mean, it's all up in the air right now at this point. I really think what you were saying with the bracket rules, that it is a bit of an oversight in terms of, like, they say we want to avoid first round matchups that have happened in the last couple of years, and we want to avoid non-conference opponents until like later in the tournament. But I mean, those are all superseded by 5 or 10 other rules, so it really doesn't do anything. I mean, we've seen ourselves play Florida State in the Sweet 16 multiple years now, and I mean, it seems like we get a lot of the same teams. So it is what it is. I think it doesn't bother the team. I think for us, it'd be a little more fun, and maybe for some of the Gonzaga haters, for some arguments with them, because they'll just say, oh, you guys beat the same 4 teams to get to the championship. And like, okay, cool. You didn't beat this team or you didn't beat that team. But you know what? If we win a national championship, then fuck them. So
if we're talking about the 4 teams we've already played, Iowa, West Virginia, Virginia, and Kansas, which team scares you the most to play again?
It's definitely not Kansas or Virginia. It's one of Iowa or West Virginia. I think generally in a tournament, I'd like to avoid West Virginia, the good defensive teams that kind of muck it up, and their offense is probably the best it's been for a West Virginia team in a while. But Iowa does not scare me, but just they've had games where they have played good defense. I don't think they're a good defensive team. But I do like our matchup against them in terms of our guards. I mean, we did a really in-depth game preview of that and just talked about where our advantages were. So, yeah, I think West Virginia, and just the way that first game went, I know there were other circumstances, but I think West Virginia would be the one that I would want to avoid until later.
I think Iowa scares me the most just because I've got, PTSD from the Wichita State game back in 2013. Anytime you run into a team that can shoot the ball, and they do, it's really, really hard to make up for that if you're not shooting the ball well. And that's kind of one thing that would scare me. I think, like, if I'm remembering back from that game correctly, Gary Bell missed like 5 threes or something. He finished with either 2 points or 0 points on the game. Meanwhile, Wichita State hit 13 threes, I think, something like that. And it's like, when a team scores 39 points from the perimeter, it's really, really hard to beat that. So that's why they would scare me a little bit. But to your point, Carson, our guards are just better defenders, I think, than Iowa is offensively. So it just kind of is what it is there. But still, a shooting team always kind of scares you in the tournament.
I think I'm going to double down on Iowa. I'm going to add the fact that we didn't even mention that they also have a top 5 player in the country for the most part in Luka Garza. So the ability to not only shoot the ball from the outside, but also have a guy who could put up 30, 35, 40 points in a game come tournament time when he's getting a third of their shots. That's also going to be a huge impact. So I think I'm going to double down on Iowa as well and say that's the team I'd like to avoid as much as possible.
I think the other thing I was saying with Iowa's and comes into foul trouble is that their big guy, their backup big guy is now out for the season. So I think if we did play them again, that would be kind of big that they don't have reinforcements to come back in if we do get in foul trouble or if Garza's in foul trouble, which could play to our advantage. I think last thing here before we transition to Dylan's betting corner here is just in terms of NCAA tournament experience. I was looking through this a little bit, And I heard someone mention this. I don't remember where it was, but we really don't. I don't think of this as an inexperienced team because it's not, but we don't have a lot of tournament experience, which is weird to talk about for a team with a bunch of sophomores and juniors and stuff on it. But we only have two guys on our team who have ever played significant minutes in an NCAA tournament game, which are Kispert and Nemhard. Nemhard played 2 games in the tournament his last year at Florida, and Kispert obviously has had plenty of experience. But Joel Ayayi is the only other player who's stepped on a court for any sort of live minutes. He played 6 minutes in the NCAA tournament in 2019 against Fairleigh Dickinson in a blowout there. Drew Timme has never played in an NCAA tournament game because there was none last year. Anton Watson, same thing. And then Jalen Suggs has not either. Actually, the one guy I didn't check was Aaron Cook. I'm not sure if they ever made the tournament there. I know he didn't really play in his last season there. So if he has, it's been 3 years. But that's the only other one to check on there. But yeah, so it could play a factor. I think these guys are ballers. I think that's been the story all year. You roll a ball out and they're ready to go. It doesn't matter if they've been there or not. There's not going to be as many fans. It is what it is. They're playing basketball. They're playing to win a championship. So it is something to keep an eye on. I'm sure it'll be talked about quite a bit as people try to figure out what to talk about with Gonzaga besides Jalen Suggs playing football. So
I forget who tweeted this out, but it was one of the local reporters in Spokane. But they said that they asked Corey Kispert, "Hey, what did you tell your team after senior night and going into the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament?" And his response was, "Don't change a thing. Don't change a thing. There's no reason to get all in our heads about about what's to come. I think." Yeah, a single elimination tournament, there is a little bit of added pressure there. But it's reassuring to hear our senior leader just say, look, guys, we're playing better basketball than just about anyone in the country. We don't need to get all in our heads about what we need to, try and do things that we're not sure we can do. If we do what we know we can do, then we're going to be okay. So it is my hope that Corey Kispert can continue to be the leader he has been. And I did just check. Aaron Cook has not played in an NCAA tournament. So we've got one guy who's played significant minutes and drops off from there. But still, it doesn't shake my confidence whatsoever. This team is ready. And I'm sure that the coaches are imparting that knowledge on them as well.
Okay. I'm going to get a jingle for the next time we do updates on something like this, but I'm going to hop over to Dylan's betting corner. Elizabeth, please turn off the podcast at this point. I do not want you listening to anything I'm about to say, as I know you are not a fan of my sports betting. This is not an endorsement of sports betting in general, nor an endorsement of Evan Mia's site as a predictor or a money-making opportunity. However, with the help of Evan's site as the major tool that I've been using, I've been able to go 31-26 on NCAA bets since February 9th. This is a collection of both over-unders, spreads, money lines, basically meaning, for anybody that's not aware, over-unders being total points scored in the game between both teams combined, spreads being the difference in points between the winner and the loser, and money line being which team is winning, period. I will say, for the most part, the spread tool is actually probably the most useful. I've gone 19-12 on spreads since then, gone 9-11 on over-unders, 3-3 on money lines. So both spreads and money lines are making me money. I basically have been looking for small spread anomalies where Evan might have the inverse or close to the inverse of the Vegas line. Example of this being, I think he had Texas at -1.5 for their game against Oklahoma, even though Vegas had it at Oklahoma +2. Oklahoma -2. So just looking for those kinds of things. I also look for the lowest and highest team totals in a given day. And compare to Evan's score. Usually what that means is I end up betting on something like the Nicholls State game, maybe the McNeese game, stuff like that. Get a couple of weird games thrown in there. And then I look for games where Vegas line is decently large, but Evan's site predicts a blowout. So I think Vegas had SDSU at -9.5 the other day. And Evan's site was predicting it at -18.5. So I went ahead and took that. I was incredibly pissed to see that in the last 34 seconds of the game, UNLV threw up 2 threes, hit both of them to take them from down 15 to down 6 and busted the spread there. So terrible loss there. I've been also doing a little bit of the parlay game, so pairing two bets together. Evan, my highlight so far has been Evan had Hampton winning by -5.5 against Presbyterian, and Vegas only had it at 2.5. The team total there, Vegas had it at 141. Evan had it at 131. Hampton won by 5, and the total was only 119. $10 gave me $26 back. Just a fun little thing I've been doing on the side. I've been tracking my bets across all the sports I've been betting on this year since Jan 1, but also in general, been tracking my NCAA pretty closely and comparing it to Evan. I'll definitely recap with him come end of NCAA season. I know he said he wants to, in the off season, put in a lot more of the betting tool type stuff. I'm hoping it doesn't move behind a paywall because it's been quite beneficial so far. Vegas definitely has some interesting takes on some of those small level games. I think people put a lot less effort into setting lines for the Hampton Presbyterian game than they might for Oklahoma, Texas. So I don't know, cool little takeaway. Maybe we'll bring it back at some point. We'll look at the end of the tournament. Maybe we'll look at NCAA tournament betting and game predictions from Evan's site. So cool. That's all I got.
What tools do you use to bet? Like, is there an app you use or
for actually set like placing bets and whatnot? Yeah. So I actually have a bookie. I had a buddy hit me up not all that long ago and was like, "Hey, I'm starting a book. You want to get on it?" And I was like, I mean, yeah. So it's kind of nice. I don't have to like upload money every time I want to place a bet, which is honestly the nicest part. I just have a running total with him and cash out end of week every week. So pretty nice. Really nice. They basically use Vegas lines for almost 99% of their bets, which is pretty cool. All right, that's going to wrap up this week's episode. Thank you all for tuning in. We will be doing a Selection Sunday rapid reaction show. So we will be right at the end of Selection Sunday. We'll record an episode. So look for that hopefully the Monday after Selection Sunday, if not that night. And then we'll also be doing a preview episode the first week of the NCAA tournament as well. We'll talk about the first two teams that were most likely, the team we will start playing, and then who we will most likely play after that. Do an in-depth analysis similar to what we've done with some of our non-conference games at the beginning of the season. That'll wrap up this week's episode of Zag Talk. Again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Go Zags!
Go Zags!
Go Zags!